Hey there. Well, in my last video, I talked a little bit about Ellery Queen, a mystery novel by Ellery Queen, The Madman Theory, which was not written by Ellery Queen, but was ghostwritten by Jack Vance. And in the end of that video, I mentioned that I would talk about some of the other Ellery Queen books in my collection. Just briefly, I'm going to run through them, okay? I have quite a few here, not all, of course. They wrote over 30 novels and several short story collections. So, Frederick Dene and Manfred B. Lee were two Brooklyn-born cousins who were writing under the name Ellery Queen because they figured the name of their detective, which was Ellery Queen in most of their novels, would be the easiest for readers to remember and buy the next book. But when they started, they weren't probably thinking of writing a whole bunch of books, a whole series about this detective. What they were doing was entering a contest. They entered a contest put on by McClure's Magazine. McClure's Magazine put a detective novel writing contest on in 1928, and the prize was $7,500, which was a lot of money back then. And so Lee and Dene entered and wrote their novel, and they won. They won the contest. But unfortunately, the magazine went bankrupt. And so even though Dene and Lee won the contest, they didn't get any money. Now, another magazine, shortly after McClure's went bankrupt, rejudged the contest. Smart Set magazine rejudged the contest, but this time they awarded the first prize to someone else, not to Dene and Lee. But the novel that they wrote, the cousins wrote, was able to be placed with the publisher, and in 1929 that came out, and that was The Roman Hat Mystery. That was the first of several Ellery Queen mystery novels. Towards the end of their careers, they started to have some more ghostwriters come in, not only writing separate novels like The Madman Theory, written by Jack Vance actually, with very little input from Lee and almost none from Dene, because he wanted nothing to do with those ghost-written, separate from their Ellery Queen detective series. But even at the end of the Ellery Queen novels themselves, the ones featuring Ellery Queen, some of those were ghost-written, or at least mostly written by another author or with other authors. But first, let me go through some of the novels that I have here. That's just a little prelim about the cousins, Mr. Dene and Mr. Lee. On kind of one last biographical note, I'm sure many of you are aware or have seen on the newsstands in various bookstores or wherever you buy magazines, Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. Still being published in 2025, 6 times a year now. Used to be monthly, now it's bi-monthly. Dene and Lee started that. Mostly Dene. Lee was less involved with the magazine, but that magazine was started in 1941. So it's been running for a long time, right? Now, and through that magazine and the auspices of that magazine, they also published several anthologies of short stories, mystery stories, and they gave a market to mystery writers trying to break in. They owe the mystery field in America owes quite a lot to those cousins, Lee and Dene, and they have quite a reputation as well. Now, their novels that they wrote themselves or what would be considered whodunits, fair play mysteries, detective novels. And Ellery Queen is the typical or prototypical golden age, turning into silver age, kind of genius detective, slightly eccentric. He starts off more so, I would say, and slightly more pompous, more like S.S. Van Dyne's character, Philo Vance, but he becomes more and more of his own man and more humane as he goes on. So let's start first with some of his earliest novels that I have. These first 4 I picked up from in Green Penguin form. Green Penguins, those of you who know about the Green Penguins, that's a sign with the livery of the Green Penguin that they're mystery novels. And I got these from the wonderful booktuber, bookseller, book collector, Jules Burt. Here's Jules here. He always sends a lovely card when you buy something from him. And he's just, basically probably the nicest guy you would ever meet on the internet. Lovely chap, as splendid chap. Anyway, he had some duplicates, and he kindly enough sold them to me for a very reasonable price. So the very earliest Ellery Queen mystery novel that I own, published in 1930, was the French Powder Mystery. Here we go. Now, the these are very readable condition. Not pristine, of course, but they're very old books. So here's a picture of Mr. Lee and Mr. Dene on the back there. And as you can see, in very readable condition inside, right? Very happy to have this. This is the second Ellery Queen novel published. Then I have, again, I don't have them all. There's gaps, especially in the earlier Ellery Queen, the original first set of novels that they wrote featuring him. They all were the blah blah mystery, the French Powder mystery, the American Gun mystery. I mentioned the Roman Hat mystery, which I don't own, the very first one. This one is from 1933, I believe, or at least the Penguin edition was published in 1933. I'm probably very close to when it was published in America. Then I have the Greek Coffin mystery. This one's in very firm shape. Again, very, very comfortable to read, easy to open, strong binding. They really made these penguins, despite them being sold fairly cheaply, they really made them to last. Then I have the Dutch Shoe mystery from 1935. Okay, and then we get, I have a couple others not in, that's the end of my penguins then, but I do have in some kind of wacky other, one of these. I don't know if you've, anyone who's been trawling through the bookshops and used bookstores and finding some 70s editions of various mystery novels, might be used to seeing these girly covered ones, what I call kind of girly calendar covers. This is the Siamese Twin mystery. This is a very early one. This one is 1933 as well. Okay, and one of those early period ones. And this is a Signet edition. Interesting cover there. And then I have the Spanish Cape mystery. Okay, this is another edition. I have a grab bag of editions. This says the special 50th anniversary edition. This is also from, is this also Signet? This is also a Signet book. And this was also originally published in 1935. So a very early story, detective novel. Now I have a few story collections as well. A hardback of The New Adventures of Ellery Queen, which is back in the States. I have Queen's Full, another story collection on my Kindle, as well as a few other early Queen novels. Next, I have The Vanishing Corpse. And nothing much on the back here, but I'll put it up anyway for someone to see it. This is a very thin one. This one is from, I have these in order, I believe. This is 1941, okay? Original title, Ellery Queen, Master Detective. Now, this is interesting because this is not, I don't believe this was written by Ellery Queen. This is actually a novelization of a 1940 movie called Ellery Queen, Master Detective, starring Ralph Bellamy. Some of you might recognize that actor, Ralph Bellamy, a young Ralph Bellamy as Ellery Queen. So I couldn't quite find out who actually wrote this novelization. I did some research, but I couldn't find out. There's not much talked about this on Goodreads or Wikipedia or elsewhere, but this is basically timed to come out with the 70s TV series, which is a really fun TV series, by the way. Period set TV series with Jim Hutton as Ellery Queen and David Wayne as his father, Inspector Richard Queen. Recommend that series if you ever have a chance to check it out. Let's get back to the real Ellery Queen novels. Here's a good one. The Murderer is a Fox. I believe this is in Ellery Queen, the detective's Hollywood period. Now, Ellery Queen was a mystery writer who also detected cases through the auspices of his father, Inspector Queen, who was kind of a New York police inspector. And that gave Ellery some access to the cases and scenes of the crime where he could use his, gray cells like Hercule Poirot his genius gray cells to come up with the clever solution to the mystery. But then he eventually went out to Hollywood to try his hand as a screenwriter and had some mysteries set there. This is one. Murder is a Fox is from, was published in 1945, and this is a Ballantine edition. Nice cue there to show Ellery Queen. Now, not all, but quite a few of these paperback editions, like the Madman Theory, which I showed in the last video, start with a cast of characters to kind of run down who the characters are. Very handy. This also tells you which page they first show up in. That's nice. And then we have a signet double edition. Ellery Queen's 10 Days Wonder and The King is Dead. Okay. Now, these are both, I believe, in what would be termed the middle period, the Wrightsville period. Ellery Queen ends up going to a kind of small hamlet or burg or town that's in upstate New York, I believe, called Wrightsville, and he gets involved in several cases there. Some of the most famous novels are set there, including one I don't have right now, but I have read, which is excellent, called Calamity Town. Now, 10 Days Wonder was published in 1948, and The King is Dead, 1952. So we're getting into that kind of middle period of Ellery Queen. And we have The Scarlet Letters. Interesting cover there. And The Scarlet Letters, I believe, is a 1953. And interestingly, look at the table of contents here, just letters of the alphabet. There's usually a very strong puzzle element, of course, in true Golden Age or Silver Age detective novel fashion. Now, the next novel in chronological order that I have is from 1956, Inspector Queen's Own Case. This one is interesting in that it does not feature Ellery. Ellery might be mentioned, if I recall, but a few times, but this one is the inspector's chance to show his mettle, to show his detective skill. And then the next one that I have, that I believe is the last one in paperback form that was written completely by Danae and Lee only, and it's a cool copy. It's a nice pocket books, I believe, edition, and that is The Finishing Stroke. A little smaller size paperback here, of course, and it's got, again, that little stabby hand on the back. And this one, I believe, was published, was it 58? Yes, 1958. And again, you have a cast of characters, right? This one's slightly beat up on the beginning part of the book, and it's got some nice, examples of notes, and sometimes you'll have maps of the murder area. Always love a murder mystery that has a map. Now, I'll show some that I have in an omnibus hardback collection later, which would fit more in the regular written by Danae and Lee cases. But now I have a few more that were not completely written by them alone. So I have a couple that were written mostly by or with Avram Davidson. Avram Davidson, the science fiction writer. And again, we get lots of science fiction writers, like Jack Vance, that seem to dabble in the mystery field. So we have Ellery Queen, The Fourth Side of the Triangle. Here, let's get this up on the other side here. Okay. Now, this was apparently written by, or at least planned by, supervised by Danae and Lee, but Avram Davidson purportedly wrote most of it himself, off of their outline perhaps. And then we have another one that Avram Davidson also wrote mostly with help from the cousins, and that's The House of Brass. Interesting diagonal blurb on the back there. You'll see, unfortunately, a little tear rip on that. Some of these Ellery Queens are a little hard to come by, so when I can find them, I get them. Again, would rather get ultra pristine editions, but if that's all I can find, that's great. Then I have some other ones here. I have The Last Score. Now, this is one that I didn't realize was ghostwritten when I grabbed it, of course. So, it was written by a man named Charles Runyon. And I believe Runyon also wrote the next one I have, The Killer Touch. Okay. So, The Last Score was written in 1964. All of the ones usually that were ghostwritten were from the 60s up into the early 70s. And The Killer Touch, 1965. And then again, they have also the cast of character breakdown in them. And then we have another one with what I termed before a girly calendar cover. Death Spins the Platter. You know, you always like to have a sexy girl on the cover. That probably sold books, but a little bit jarring with the tone probably of a Ellery Queen novel, although getting into the 60s here, maybe getting a little bit more hip to the situation at the time. Swinging 60s and all that. This is from 1962, okay? And the hero of this one is a reporter. So, a reporter named Jim Layton. And this is published again by, I believe this is Signet, right? They have their lovely, I think this was reprinted. When was this? Must have been in the 70s, I would guess. 73, which is why you see these kind of covers. And of course, it's not only Ellery Queen that had the girly covers. There were others. Now, that leads me to my last edition that I have here. I might have a few more back home, but in the States. But I also have this omnibus hardback edition. And now this was put out, I have several Agatha Christie and other ones. This was put out by Avenel Books in New York. And as you can see on the cover there, I don't think that's a very, looks like it's more modeled after Ralph Bellamy from the 40 movie. There was I think 1940s, there was a few more besides Ellery Queen, Master Detective, starring Ralph Bellamy, a brief series of movies. And I don't believe they're supposed to be particularly accurate or close to the novels. Anyway, 5 novels there, okay? And on the eighth day is one that was also written by, or mostly written by Avram Davidson. The player on the other side here was ghostwritten mostly by Theodore Sturgeon, another famous science fiction writer. Again, the Queens were involved more than in the standalone ones. And these again are starring the character Ellery Queen. Then we have Inspector Queen's Own Case again, which I already showed you in the paperback form. And 2 others, Cat of Many Tales, which is very famous and Ellery Queen mystery novel, kind of set in a very oppressively hot summer in New York City. Again, back before everyone had air conditioners, so everyone's blistering in the heat, including Ellery, who's trying to type out a novel and gets distracted by the case, kind of a serial murder case where both men and women are being strangled. The men have strangled with a blue silk ribbon and the women with a pink silk ribbon. And it's a pretty clever mystery, maybe a little long, but quite clever, as a lot of these are. And then we have Double Double. Now, Double Double, I believe, came immediately after this one. And let me see if I don't have a quick date on these. But anyway, all 5 novels in this big omnibus edition. So that's the extent of the physical books I have. I also have a few in Kindle form. Like I mentioned before, I have Queen's Full, the Ellery Queen short story collection, of which there were several. And I also have The Origin of Evil, which comes right after Cat of Many Tales and Double Double in the chronological order of Queen novels. And I believe I have the Egyptian Cross mystery, one of the very early ones from the early 30s, and on Kindle as well. So that about does it for my Ellery Queen collection. I like to talk about many kinds of books on this channel, or I plan to talk about many genres of books. I love fantasy. I love pulp, adventure, fiction. some horror, classic horror, particularly in horror short stories, science fiction, and westerns. And I also really like mysteries. So you'll see some mystery novel coverage for sure on this channel. So hope you enjoyed that little jaunt down Ellery Queen, the Ellery Queen bibliography there. And as always, I'm very happy that you've decided to spend a little time with me today and check out my video. Until next time, happy reading, and we'll see you again.